A racist white woman is rushed to the hospital, where a doctor saves her life. When she awakens, she's outraged to see a black man standing over her. The emergency room hummed with the relentless rhythm of life-and-death decisions. Nurses moved with urgency, and monitors beeped in sync with the controlled chaos. Dr. Grant stepped into the fray, his eyes scanning the room with the calm precision of someone who had seen it all before. A nurse approached him, her face tight with concern. "Dr. Grant, we've got a situation. Jennifer Harris, 56, critical condition. She's in surgery now, but there were complications." Grant nodded, his focus shifting entirely to the task at hand. Without hesitation, he suited up and made his way to the operating room. The weight of the situation settled in. Miss Harris had been brought in after collapsing at her home. What had started as a routine surgery had quickly spiraled into something far more urgent. His job now was to salvage what he could. The surgery stretched on for hours. Grant's hands remained steady and precise as he blocked out the noise, the distractions, and even the small tremors of exhaustion creeping into his body. He had learned long ago that in situations like these, there was no room for hesitation. He had been in too many life-or-death moments to let stress or anger affect his work. His mind was fully engaged. Each incision, each stitch, each adjustment was a precise calculation. As the clock ticked on, he remained in that space of pure concentration, where everything else ceased to exist. It was just him and the patient on the table. The faint sound of the heart monitor beeping and the soft shuffle of nurses' feet were the only reminders that time was passing. When he finally finished, he peeled off his gloves and glanced at the clock. Hours had passed, but Miss Harris was stable. For now, she had made it through the worst of it. But the next 24 hours would be critical. He knew this was only the beginning, but at least she had a fighting chance. He gave the nurses their instructions, ensuring everything was set for her recovery, then turned and walked out of the operating room. His eyes lingered for a moment on her still form. A woman like Jennifer Harris, wealthy, influential, and deeply entrenched in her privilege, was lucky to have made it through such a complicated surgery. But Grant didn't think about that. He didn't need to. As he left the room, his mind moved on to the next task. There was always more due in a hospital, and Dr. Grant had long accepted the relentless pace. He didn't think about how many patients he had saved or how many people might never know his name. What mattered was the work. What mattered was saving lives, no matter who they were. Jennifer Harris, for all her wealth and status, was no different. She was a person, a patient who needed his help, and that was all that mattered. Dr. Grant stepped into the hallway, the hum of the emergency room fading as he moved toward his office. But despite his professional exterior, a small, nagging thought remained in the back of his mind. Jennifer Harris. Her name had come with a certain weight, and it wasn't just her social status. It was the stories he'd heard about her. Her reputation as a woman of wealth and privilege who held deep, unapologetic biases against people like him. He'd seen it before, heard it before. The casual racism that bled to the fabric of certain circles. People who thought that because of their money, their influence, they were untouchable above the very system that supported them. Dr. Grant had learned long ago not to take it personally. It was a waste of energy to let prejudice affect him, but it was hard to ignore when it was so blatant, so pervasive. He couldn't help but think about how much Jennifer had likely looked down on him, had dismissed his very worth simply because of the color of his skin. It stung, but it was a sting he had long learned to numb. Hours later, as Jennifer began to slowly regain consciousness, she was unaware of the storm that had passed over her body. The anesthesia still lingered, clouding her thoughts and making her movements sluggish. But the first thing she noticed when she began to wake up was the unfamiliar surroundings, the bright lights above her, the soft beep of the machines around her, and the cold, sterile smell that seemed to hang in the air. Her vision was blurry, but as her eyes focused, she saw a figure standing over her. A man, a black man. It wasn't just any man. He was wearing the same sterile hospital gown, and the look on his face was one of quiet authority. But all she could focus on was the color of his skin. She blinked, hoping her vision was playing tricks on her. Her heart skipped a beat. No, this couldn't be happening. Not him. Where am I? Her voice cracked as she struggled to sit up, her head spinning. "You're in the hospital," Dr. Grant replied smoothly, his voice calm, his expression controlled. "You've been through a serious surgery, but you're stable now." He kept his tone professional, but there was a brief flicker in his eyes as he observed her reaction. It wasn't surprise or concern. It was an understanding of what was about to come. He had seen it before. Jennifer Harris, still groggy from the effects of anesthesia, struggled to piece together what had happened. Her body felt like lead. She glanced at the fluid drip in her arm, the bandages on her chest, and tried to process it all. But as she looked up, her eyes landed on him, the man standing over her, with dark skin and calm eyes. Her blood ran cold. She couldn't help the sneer that tugged at her lips. A black man. Her voice was weak but filled with disbelief, her gaze narrowing with contempt. "You're the one who saved me?" Dr. Grant didn't flinch. He had been through worse. He had heard worse. 1,000,000 times before. He had spent years in medical school and beyond, perfecting his craft while fighting against the systemic prejudices that whisper in the background of his success. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was this woman who, even now, was struggling to accept the reality of what had just happened. "I'm Dr. Grant," he said, his voice smooth and steady. "I was the one who performed your surgery. You're going to be fine." Jennifer's lips curled into a bitter smile, though the effort clearly drained her. Her body felt heavy, but her mind was sharp with anger. She looked up at him, searching for something in his face, anything that would let her dismiss him. But there was nothing. His expression was neutral, unbothered by her disdain. She forced herself to sit up, her breath ragged. "I don't care who you are. You had no right to treat me. I don't need your help. I don't need you." Her words were slurred but harsh, filled with a venom that could not be concealed. Dr. Grant took a moment before responding, his voice unwavering. "You're alive because of me," he said simply, his eyes meeting hers. "And whether you want to admit it or not, I did exactly what I was trained to do, save lives." Jennifer's chest heaved in anger, but her physical weakness prevented her from pushing forward with any more insults. She couldn't even summon the strength to sit fully upright without the room spinning. She wanted to yell, to demand a new doctor, but her body wouldn't cooperate. The frustration was palpable. "I want another doctor," she muttered, trying to sit up again, but the pain in her chest made her wince. "There is no one else," Dr. Grant said, his tone more final now. "I'm the head of this department, and I'm the one who saved your life. Whether you like it or not, you're in my hands." Jennifer's face reddened with anger, her eyes flashing with contempt. "You think I'm going to be grateful to you? You think I'm going to thank you?" Her voice wavered with disbelief. Dr. Grant said nothing. He simply turned and walked out of the room, his footsteps soft against the floor. There was no point in arguing with her, especially now. She wasn't ready to listen. But Dr. Grant knew one thing. She would never forget who had saved her life. As the door clicked shut behind him, Jennifer lay back on the bed, her thoughts swirling in a storm of rage and confusion. She was alive, yes, but at what cost? She couldn't accept it. She couldn't accept him. A black man, in the hospital, saving her life? It was too much. Jennifer lay there for what felt like hours, her thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and anger. Every fiber of her being wanted to scream, to fight against the injustice she felt was thrust upon her. She had no idea how much time had passed since Dr. Grant had left the room. The steady beep of the heart monitor kept time in the silence, but it did little to calm her. Her chest ached, her body weak and trembling from the surgery, but her mind was razor sharp, focusing on one thing. Him, Dr. Grant, a black man who had dared to save her life. The thought made her stomach churn. How could this happen? She had always been careful about who she trusted. She knew the world she lived in, an exclusive, refined world where power, money, and privilege defined everything. Jennifer had always surrounded herself with people who were just like her, white, wealthy, influential. And yet, here she was, lying in a hospital bed, the very life that had been ripped away from her and put back by someone she never would have chosen to trust. No, she thought, gritting her teeth, I don't need him. I don't need any of them. When the door to her room opened again, she turned her head, expecting to see a nurse, maybe another doctor. But instead, it was Dr. Grant. He walked in without hesitation, his eyes focused, determined. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice calm, as if he hadn't just heard her venom-filled words. "How do you think?" Jennifer snapped, her voice full of acid. "I've been treated by someone like you." His expression didn't shift, his gaze steady. "You're alive because of me. If you prefer to argue that fact, we can certainly do so, but you're welcome to be mad all you want. I saved your life, and that's not going to change." The word stung, but she fought back the bitter response that wanted to spill out of her mouth. She wasn't in any position to argue, not physically. She had already tried to dismiss him, to push him away, but his calm, unwavering confidence had cut through her rage. "Why didn't you just let me die?" she spat out. "That would have been so much easier." Dr. Grant didn't react, but there was a flicker in his eyes, a brief moment of something deeper, something he chose not to show. He held her gaze for a long beat before speaking. "Because I don't make life and death decisions based on race or color. I make them based on the person lying in front of me." Her heart skipped at his words. She didn't know whether to be more infuriated or impressed by his calm. She looked away from him, staring out the window at the sterile view of the parking lot below. The sunlight outside should have made her feel better, but the truth was, she couldn't escape the weight of what had just happened. She couldn't shake the fact that the very person she looked down upon, belittled, and dismissed was the one who had saved her life. Dr. Grant's voice broke through her thoughts. "You'll be fine. The next few days will be critical, but your recovery is on track. I'll be checking in on you regularly. You need rest, not bitterness." She didn't say anything, her pride too sharp to allow a response that might sound even remotely humble. Instead, she turned her back to him, closing her eyes, pretending to drift into sleep. But she wasn't sleeping. She could feel the anger and shame simmering beneath the surface. She wasn't ready to face the truth yet. Not today. Not yet. The next few days passed in a blur of sterile smells, dull hospital lights, and quiet conversations. Jennifer found herself more and more resistant to Dr. Grant's presence in her room. But the truth was, she wasn't in control anymore. She had been lying in a hospital bed, at the mercy of the very system she had so often criticized. And Dr. Grant, he had saved her life. That fact was becoming harder to ignore, no matter how much she hated it. Jennifer spent most of the time with her eyes closed, pretending to sleep. But when Dr. Grant came in, she couldn't help but feel a sense of unease as she saw his calm, assured face. His presence in the room was a constant reminder of her vulnerability. On the third day of her recovery, Jennifer was sitting up in her bed, propped up by pillows. The nurses had started removing some of the tubes and IVs, and she was beginning to feel a little more like herself. The door opened, and Dr. Grant entered, his usual steady pace never faltering. She didn't even look at him this time. "I see you're doing better," he said, his voice carrying the same professional tone as always. "Your heart rate is stable. I think we'll have you on your feet in a day or two." She didn't respond, staring out the window again. He paused, sensing the tension in the room. "I know you're angry, but I'm not the one who caused the damage. That's not my fault." Jennifer's fingers tightened on the blanket. The words she wanted to say were stuck in her throat, her pride and shame fighting for dominance. She didn't want to admit that maybe he was right, that the anger she felt wasn't about him. It was about her own ignorance, her own blind spots. But then the door opened again, and the administrator entered. Dr. Grant stepped aside, a small nod of acknowledgement. "Jennifer Harris," the administrator said, his voice neutral. "I wanted to speak with you about your recovery and about the incident that's come to light." Jennifer's heart skipped. She knew what was coming. The news about her racist comments, the one she had made under her breath about Dr. Grant, had gotten out. She had hoped it would stay quiet, but of course it hadn't. "Miss Harris," the administrator continued, "there are certain behaviors that will not be tolerated in this hospital. Your remarks about Dr. Grant are not only inappropriate, but also harmful. The hospital takes discrimination very seriously." Jennifer's face flushed with anger, but she held her tongue. She had been expecting this, but it didn't make it easier to hear. Dr. Grant looked at her, his eyes soft but firm. "It's not about me. It's about everyone who's been made to feel lesser because of their skin color. And I'm not just talking about myself. There are others like me in this hospital and beyond who face the same treatment every day. You have a responsibility to recognize that. Jennifer said nothing. The silence in the room was deafening. The administrator glanced between the two of them before speaking again. You will be receiving an official warning. And I encourage you to reflect on your actions because the world does not revolve around privilege. It never has. The administrator turned and left, leaving Jennifer in stunned silence. She didn't know what to say. The shame hit her like a wave, crashing over her, sweeping away the anger and replacing it with an uncomfortable, undeniable truth. Dr. Grant stood there for a moment, his presence as steady as ever. Then, without another word, he left, leaving her alone with her thoughts. Jennifer lay back against the pillow, her thoughts a tangled mess. The anger, the bitterness, everything she had held on to seemed so much smaller now. She wasn't just angry at Dr. Grant anymore. She was angry at herself. She closed her eyes, trying to shut out the reality of her own ignorance, but the weight of it clung to her. Jennifer sat in her hospital room, the silence pressing down on her. Her thoughts were tangled in knots, her mind reeling from everything she had heard, from the administrator's words to Dr. Grant's quiet but firm stance. The reality of her actions weighed heavily on her chest. She had always considered herself open-minded, progressive even, but now, in the stark light of her hospital room, she saw how blind she had been. How could I be so ignorant? She closed her eyes, allowing herself a moment of reflection. But even in that quiet space, she couldn't escape the truth that had been laid bare. Dr. Grant had saved her life, not because he owed her anything, not because she deserved it, but because it was his job, because he was good at it, and she had dismissed him simply because of the color of his skin. That realization was like a punch in the gut. Jennifer had been taught to believe that people like her, the ones who came from old money, from privilege, deserved the best. She had always assumed that those around her were just reflections of that same privilege. But now she understood that her narrow view had made her blind to the truth. It wasn't the color of someone's skin that determined their worth. It was their actions, their skills, their humanity. She sighed and ran her hand through her hair. Why had it taken something like this to open my eyes? The door creaked open again, and Jennifer's heart skipped in her chest. She had been expecting another visit from Dr. Grant, but she wasn't sure if she was ready for another confrontation. She wasn't even sure what she would say. But it wasn't Dr. Grant who entered the room this time. It was a nurse, one Jennifer had seen before. She was kind, approachable, but today, the nurse's eyes seemed to carry a little more weight, a little more understanding. "I just came to check on you," the nurse said softly, her voice gentle. "How are you feeling?" Jennifer wasn't sure what to say. She wasn't sure how to even answer that question anymore. But something inside her urged her to be honest. "I don't know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm struggling." She paused, looking out the window as she spoke. "I was so wrong. I've spent my whole life looking down on people, judging them because of things that have nothing to do with who they are. I'm ashamed." The nurse didn't respond immediately. She gave Jennifer space, letting her words settle in the air between them. After a moment, the nurse spoke again. "Everyone has a moment when they realize something about themselves," she said, her tone understanding. "What matters is what you do after. No one is perfect, but we can all choose to do better." Jennifer looked at her, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and shame. "But what if it's too late? What if the damage I've done can't be undone?" "It's never too late," the nurse replied, her eyes kind and steady. "You're still here. You're still breathing. That's the first step." Jennifer swallowed, feeling something like hope rise in her chest for the first time since the surgery. Maybe she could make amends. Maybe she could change. Over the next few days, Jennifer's recovery continued at a steady pace. Dr. Grant's visits became a quiet routine. She still couldn't help but feel a deep sense of discomfort when he entered the room. But there was something else now, too. Something different. She no longer felt the same fury or resentment. Instead, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the man who had saved her life, for the man she had once dismissed. But how could she express it? She wasn't sure where to begin. How did someone apologize for something as deep as the prejudices they had carried their whole life? The weight of it pressed on her, but Jennifer was determined. Every time Dr. Grant entered the room, she found herself fighting the urge to turn away, to keep her mouth shut. But finally, one day, as he entered, she couldn't hold it in any longer. "Dr. Grant," she said, her voice shaky but clear, I need to apologize to you. For everything I said, for how I treated you. I was wrong. So wrong. You saved my life, and I didn't even deserve that. I can't even begin to explain how ashamed I am." Dr. Grant looked at her, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then, finally, he nodded slowly. "You don't owe me an apology," he said quietly, his voice surprisingly warm. "You owe it to yourself, though. You owe it to your own humanity. To see beyond your prejudices and truly see people for who they are." Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. It was a small step, but it felt like the first real step she had taken in years. The burden she had carried, of ignorance, of hatred, began to lift ever so slightly. "I'm trying," she said, her voice cracking. "But I know it's going to take time." Dr. Grant smiled faintly. "It always does. But that's the only way." Jennifer sat there, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The weeks following Jennifer's surgery were a blur. The media caught wind of the story, of the powerful woman who had been saved by the very doctor she had once looked down upon. The public outcry was swift. Social media erupted with opinions, some defending Jennifer, others condemning her behavior. But the real turning point came when Jennifer made her first public statement. It was a carefully prepared apology, but it was heartfelt, raw. She admitted her mistakes, confessed her prejudices, and promised to do better. She vowed to support causes that promoted diversity, to fight against systemic racism in her own community, and to start making real change. Dr. Grant was mentioned in the statement, but not as a symbol of her redemption. Instead, Jennifer acknowledged him for who he was, an extraordinary doctor who had given her a second chance at life, regardless of the color of his skin. In the weeks that followed, Jennifer threw herself into learning. She attended seminars on diversity and inclusion, hired people from marginalized communities, and started speaking out against the injustices that plagued her world. It wasn't easy and it wasn't fast, but for the first time, Jennifer understood that the change she had to make wasn't just for the world around her. It was for herself. As for Dr. Grant, he continued his work in the hospital. He was still the calm, unshakable presence he had always been, but now there was a subtle shift. People began to recognize the quiet power he held, not just because he was a top surgeon, but because he had chosen to stand by his values, even when it meant confronting deep-seated prejudice. One afternoon, as Jennifer stood outside the hospital, waiting for a car, she saw Dr. Grant leaving. For the first time, she approached him without hesitation. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice carrying the weight of everything she had learned. "Thank you for saving my life. And thank you for showing me who I could be." Dr. Grant stopped, his expression softening. He didn't need to say anything. His actions, the way he had carried himself through all of it, spoke louder than any words ever could. Jennifer smiled, a true smile this time, one that held no bitterness, no anger, just gratitude. "Take care, Miss Harris," he said with a nod before walking away. She stood there, watching him go. In that moment, she knew that the road ahead would be long, but she was on the right path now.